Okay, and we're back. Now we're in the exciting phase. We basically made our stuff and we just want to break up our mortar in preparation for the simulation and maybe do a couple other things. The, the things I wanted to point out in texturing is even though we've done all this stuff, we can still do things like this and say show the colors of the front and back and sides. And although it sits there and goes through all the, you can't see it's off screen, but it's doing the fluid, this, that, and the other. It still does all that. Why? Because our little texturizer, we're using the same thing, still works for everything. And we also still stretch the textures and so forth. It's going to be really cool. So our next step is we're going to take this guy and we're going to chop him up with a certain percentage of the cut points. In other words, these guys, if we actually, and again, I'm going to use Voronoi. You guys know I hate Voronoi, right? It looks computery. Since we've already in tiny little bits and we're just chopping it up, it's really not going to be that onerous. As a matter of fact, you've already seen it in those other things. And we can also decide how much. So what we could do is we could use all of these points and make a bunch of teeny tiny little guys. It's practically dust at that point. So we don't want to do that. We need high points to get all these little nooks and crannies of the texture, but we don't need all of them for Voronoi. And Voronoi is also going to be ungodly slow. Well, not ungodly slow. It'll probably be like 6 minutes or something. So I won't make you guys wait through that, and I'll just do it. But what I'll do is we'll have a button under here for, probably I'll put it here called bake, and it'll bake it out to a file. So I guess the reason I'm saying all this stuff is we want to say what percentage of these guys we want. So we want the user to be able to go, what mortar points, here, let's do our thing I always say I do. Let's say we've done our texturing, we've done our cut points, our polygon creation. Now we kind of want to do our mortar bits. So let's make a folder, yoink, yoink, yoink. And this is going to be part of our mortar bits creation. Mortar is a hard word to spell, is what we've learned. Mortar bits. And it's something we do at the end of all this. So there. So the first thing we're going to say is we're going to need a float to say what percentage of those mortar guys we want. In other words, what percentage of the points we do. What percent of the points do we want to use for the mortar breakup? I don't even know how you'd phrase that. I'm going to call it, the label will be something like, percent cut points for breakup. Yeah, that makes sense, right? That might be too long, but I don't know. What should the default be? I don't know, maybe 50%, who knows? So I'm going to hit the accept and the blah, blah, blah button. So now we have this. Percent cut points for mortar breakup. And I'm going to copy this because we're going to paste it into whatever we use to do this. So, also, we're probably going to want to see that, right? So in our little show guy, we're going down the list. If we're using this, we've already made our stone, our mortar, blah, blah, blah. We're going to another one. We're going to want to, we've already seen the cut points. Now we're going to call these are the mortar bit chop up points. I'm going to call it mortar bit points. Mortar bit points. Make sense? Mortar bit points. And that'll be the next thing that we show. Mortar bit points. The reason this is important is because this is the next thing that's going to be somewhat slow, but it's also kind of crucial. These are the actual things that get simmed. We already know the rocks are going to get simmed, or we already know about the stones, right? And we like them, they're cool and everything. But now there's a question of how tightly these little bits in between are. It's going to be the kind of thing where when you do it as a test to show it for, say you're working for a studio and some big movie and a superhero is going to throw it flying through the wall and people see it and clap because it's awesome. And you're going to want to do your little test, maybe with just the stones, a very simple number, but for the final thing in the movie, you might use bullets more. So let's make that as an option. Okay, so now the question is, where are the cut points? Remember the cut points here. Here they are. Now, your first thing to say is Jeff, since that's my name. You're going to say, Jeff, we already 2Dified these points, right? So why aren't we using these 2Dified points here to chop it up? Well, the reason is now we're going to take those mortar bits and chop them up and chop up just the solid mortar. But as we know how Voronoi works, if we give them just the 2D guys in this direction, then they'll be all clean and sharp in this direction. And they'll all be like laser direct. So I'm going to use these guys because they're a little more messy. They have spots and gaps and thickness. So that's why we don't do it initially with the flat 2D guy, 2Dified guys, but we kept them around. That's our reason for all that stuff. We're going to put down a delete node of points. If you remember way back when, years and years ago, when we started this tutorial, that's why we did that. And now the time has come to have the payoff. So what we're going to do, I'm going to call these points to break up mortar. And what we're going to do is you say delete by range, and it's going to be a percent. So it's out of 100, and it's some percent. And we already have that number because we copied it from before when we copied it from made our points for the breakup. So in this case, be 50% or maybe 5%. So let's bring these guys down where we're going to use them. I know it's bad to cross the lines, but it's okay this time. It's kind of unavoidable in this case. I still feel dirty doing it. So now we're adding points to break up mortar into the show. Bonk. Let's go up here. Mortar bit points is what we called it. Okay, now we go to points to break up mortar. Bear with me for a second. I'm going to change the name to points to break up mortar, just so we're being more exact and precise. Just sounds better, you know? Okay. Just bugs me and I don't like it. So we hit apply, we hit accept. So now if we're looking at the points to break up mortar, and we have our percentage cut points per breakup, we'll put it down to around 5. Oh, we should make this out of 100. We should set the range here to be 1 to 100, 0 to 100. So we'll change the range to be from 0 to 100 to make the slider work better. So if we put in 90, actually let's change this to how many we actually use. So let's say delete non-selected. Bonk. Okay, so now we put percentage of cut points for breakup, and we'll put it to like 5%. So it means this many, right? We might even go down a little lower to like, you know, crazy numbers like 2%. Again, we don't need a lot, but we do need some. Maybe we'll go back up to 5. Okay. Okay, so we can noodle this. Obviously, it's very dependent upon the image and how many points we made from it. And your sims, what they're like, how much time you have for sim, that sort of thing. Our next thing is the dreaded one. Okay, so I hate to type these words, but we're going to type it V-O-R-O, Voronoi fracture, the dreaded Voronoi. We'll even give it a color just so we know it's evil. So the breakup points go here in the second input. And the thing to break up is our actual mortar that we're going to put in the first input. Our solid mortar, which we have somewhere over here. Oh, right there. Our solid mortar, this guy. So this next thing we're going to do is the actual Voronoi breakup of the mortar. And it's going to chop that by these points. Now, I'm going to connect it up, and it's going to take a little time. It's not super fast. It's going to sit there with all those points and chop away and chop it up into little mortar bits. Now, it's going to be super slow if I just hit it now. So first I'm going to turn off auto update. And all these parameters, all the parameters to Voronoi fracture, I'm going to initially just leave those alone. Well, a couple things I want to mention. In some cases, you might want to actually cluster pieces and set it up by clusters. I'm not going to do it in this case, but it might look good. Basically, it connects a bunch of the little mortar points directly. Also, for the final, you might add internal detail. Make things a little slower, but might look a little cooler in the final thing. Again, all this increases sim time, but might increase realism. So it's really a question of the payoff at that point. For this tutorial, we're going to do the simple version. But the one thing I am going to add is the piece group prefix and the attribute. We're going to change the name of the prefix to mortar piece. And what I'm going to do is put down a file cache, because this is slow. So we're going to want to save this to disk and cache this out. And I won't make you guys sit through it all. I'll hit the pause button. So I hit a file cache, and we are baking the mortar. So I'm going to call this baked mortar bits. And it's going to go just for the current frame. And we're going to do it just once, load from disk, and it'll go here. And we just need one frame because it's only going to do this once at the very beginning of the whole sim. Now I'm going to change the name here. We don't need a frame number this. So I'm just going to call it mortar bits. And I'm going to hit this button here, and I'll hit pause so don't sit through it. It'll chug away and chop that up. So we'll come back in a second. So come back for the next lesson, and you will see them all chopped up, and we'll cruise on. So I'm going to hit this button right here. Don't try to stop me. I'm going to hit it. Come back for the next lesson. We're almost there.